pregnant horse urine is a great way to get synthetic estrogens. And Premarin was given for years to women like water, thanks to Pfizer's marketing. It gave so much estrogen it caused breast cancer. Cannabis is used throughout the U.S. and is used illicitly in widespread locales.
But that's a federal crime.
Impossible. Oh, there we go. Hypnotic and anti-epileptic effects of cannabidiol. J. Pharma called 1981. So that kind of kills any patent. Pharmacology, 1980. Holy moly. And
so this is what the lawyers would pull up to try to invalidate.
I'd be shoving that in front of the judge saying, Your Honor, people have known this would work. These people aren't geniuses. Well, without the pipeline, I get jazz worth. This is really good.
Is not a botanical drug.
Right.
You can synthesize it from yams?
Estrogen, yeah. This is the first and, to my knowledge, only application of marijuana in medicine. It does say it controls growing, harvesting, and primary processing of it, all this stuff, but ultimately you don't need any of that if you can just make a synthetic. That's a very easy synthesis. The price of this thing is so high that I don't even think the synthetic versus natural is going to make a difference from a product cost perspective. The manufacturing would be another couple million, so you could conceivably make a fortune making a generic Epidiolex. The problem with that is that you'd have to overturn all those patents in court. Once a drug goes generic, you kind of all the elasticity disappears.
Martin, could you walk through the technical analysis you're doing for jazz right now?
This is not technical analysis. Technical analysis is when you do a stock chart thing.
So what is it that you're doing?
This is a fundamental analysis, I guess.
Are you projecting out to 2023?
I'm going to project out to infinity, actually. Yeah, so the hardest thing with pharmaceuticals typically is just getting the curve of the revenue right, which heavily depends on patent expiry, which is what I'm looking up now for this product, which is relatively new. It's called Xywave, and it's intended to replace Jazz's biggest product called Xyrem. Xyrem's been around for a long time. It's also known as GHB. Yeah, so Xyrem is taken for people with narcolepsy. It's obviously got an illicit use as well, but Xyrem was approved in 2002. It never went generic, interestingly, because of a wrinkle that, well, some people who know the backstory know. Basically, the drugs like Xyrem are so dangerous for people to take that they have to be controlled very carefully because their release is very, very risky. So every single person that takes Xyrem has to be carefully monitored because, again, these drugs are really toxic.
What's the generic name for that? Because I work in drug delivery.
Sodium oxybate, also known as GHB, gamma-hydroxybutyrate. Xyrem is just a very dangerous medicine, so they have a so-called REMS program, and the REMS program limits the distribution, but at the same time, it limits access for generics to get samples to make generics of. Companies have learned that, nobody can get a copy of my pills, then nobody can make a generic, and there's sort of a win-win, or I guess a second benefit, if you will. There's a bit of that in my FTC case, for what it's worth. When patents expire is sort of up to the interpretation there. They have patents going all the way out to 2037. Most patents are not valuable, however, will not protect your product. My guess is Xywave will probably go generic at some point, possibly because these patents are challenged, possibly just because the patents expire. So you just have to sort of get a sense for that. I'm going to end of life it around 2023. Epidiolex is really interesting because I'm not sure you can make cannabidiol that easily. Let me see if I get the structure. Yeah, you may not be able to make
Isn't it just extracted from cannabis?
Yeah, but this isn't too hard to make. I'm just trying to make sure that, the manufacturing process isn't too complicated. You would make it synthetically, as I assume they make it synthetically, but I'm not sure. It's just very fatty, that's all. I mean, it's not that big a deal. The log P's has to be enormous. 6. It's a high log P, I'll tell you that. It's got almost no polarity. It's like just a bunch of fat. It's got some polarity the right places, I guess.
It's just the aromatic rings that are really giving to the apolarity.
No, I mean, it's just the lack of
It's got that fatty branch.
lack of heteroatoms, too. I mean, It's 2 heteroatoms, the whole molecule. It's amazing, huh? How often do you see that?
I guess a lot in plants.
Yeah, not so much in medicine. Yeah, a lot in oil, oil-like compounds. It's obviously very different from the sterile, but it feels like you could, if you joined, you almost can get a sterile from this, or maybe from a sterile you could get to here. I wonder if the synthetic route, well, synthetic route for sterols are very, very difficult.
Why is Xyrem so dangerous?
Oh, so Xyrem will put you asleep very quickly and easily. So that's why GHB has its effect. You know, people who take Xyrem, they have narcolepsy or cataplexy, so they can't get a good night's rest without Xyrem. But the problem is they can't wake up either. So during their sleep, they're basically, you know, very hard to wake up. So if there's a fire or something like that, they really wouldn't be able to wake up. So you got to tell your neighbor you're on Xyrem if.
What were they giving Michael Jackson? That was an injection.
Propofol.
That's right, bro.
Yeah, a bit different.
Do you still get REM sleep when you're out on the drugs?
I think you
I think
do.
your brain's just off. You think it happens?
Sorry?
You think it does happen?
What?
Or REM sleep?
Yeah. I think that's the point. Epidiolex will probably go generic as well, since it's a small molecule. Cannabidiol is not.
Where would they produce that? In a place like India or something?
Yeah. I remember the old company, Pharma. Jazz is pretty smart when it comes to buying assets like this, but, you know, it's the orphan drug exclusivity expires after 7 years. So after 2025, it's sort of fair game for a generic. They
We're
can
gonna see
have
that on the
a
market.
ton of patents. Holy moly.
And those be contested in court?
Yeah.
Those patents, because it's a natural molecule and actually occurring?
It depends on each claim. So usually I do a little claims analysis, but in this case, there's
Significant.
20 of them. Usually settle. So, but
Yeah, did they just have cannabidiol patented? No excipients or anything?
yeah, I'll show you I'll make a little. That's what the whole point of this file is. They have stuff like a different array of patents. For instance, one of the common ones is method of use. So method of use is the treatment of Dravet syndrome and Lennox-Gastaut syndrome, which is, that's the first patent they got. In this case, somewhat impressive that, and it was unexpected, I would say. Now, on the flip side, it was known to some extent from a drug called Charlotte's Web. It was on, I believe it was even on 60 Minutes at one point.
Yeah, it was a Vice 60 Minutes. That was a strain that they developed in Colorado.
So a method of use for epilepsy conceivably could be, patent could be invalidated because of prior art. So let me see if I can check it out here.
Yeah,
So
it turned into Dravet syndrome, Charlotte Web or something like that.
it's got to be in something like a PubMed. So in 2017, let me see, cannabidiol for Dravet. Let me try that. And let's see what the earliest date was. And you can see 2014, there was no shortage of analysis for this stuff before GW made their application. But they made an app in 2014. Interesting. They did make an application in 2014, in June of 2014, which is around the time this stuff got popular. So that's pretty good, I would say. And it was a surprise that these drugs worked because there was no double-blind placebo-controlled study. Charlotte looks like it was around May, June of 2014. They filed this patent in June. And again, you could argue that without the double-blind study that you didn't have real evidence that it worked. They had to produce a double-blind study. That's a tough one, and I'm sure they have other similar patents with, like you said, formulation patent, method of use patent, so forth and so forth. Let's look at another one. Another use patent there. All right, so it's four of the patents are all the same, really. Maybe 5, actually. So a little unusual. It's typically not what happens, but all right, here's the next substantive patent. Let's see. Again, use of cannabinoids. It's funny because whenever people try to talk to me about weed, this is the only example I can come up with. of a successful application of cannabinoids in medicine.
Is anybody making any money off of this specific
Jazz making a fortune.
application? No, not Jazz. Just like this application of this patent. Like, there is efficacy, but like, is anybody making money on it? Like,
Jazz.
seriously.
That's all this drug is used for. Yeah, it's a $1 billion product. It's doing really well. This is the first, and to my knowledge, only application of marijuana in medicine. Someone's asking multiple patents for the same thing. It's complicated. You can make many inventions around a product. There's a lot of different classifications of patents. The method of use is you discovered a new use for sort of an existing chemical. You can also formulate that chemical in an innovative way. Let's see what else they have in the story.
Gray or something.
Yeah, so far they only have method of use patents, which I would argue, again, the patent office gives a lot of excessive patents. And, if you get another claim issued from the same application, you get another patent, even though you got another claim. So let's see. Okay, here we go. Processes and extraction of active substances and enriched extracts from natural products. So this is probably not going to be a reasonable patent because ultimately, okay, so it looks like
Is that a closed loop system that the diagram is, or what is that?
I'm not sure, but I'm just trying to.
Looked like a soxlet extraction.
I'm trying to think about the other products I know like this and how they fared with IP. This reminds me of Premarin, but it also depends on. Yeah, this is tricky.
What's the tricky part about it?
Well, so it's sort of the way the FDA treats it. So sometimes there's guidance documents. Here we go. Draft guidance on generic cannabidiol.
Okay, within last year.
Oh, wow. Wow. Okay, hold on. They may not require BRM. That's what they're calling biological raw material. So if they require BRM, I would say there won't be a generic. I wouldn't touch it. If I were a generic company, that's a disaster. But if I could just make the one product, right, cannabidiol, just the molecule, that'd be fine.
You would have to monocrop it or have a specific single strain that you would use if you're going to have any.
This would be so difficult. But notice they say here, if the API is from a botanical raw material source, the following criteria are recommended. It doesn't say that it has to be. This is really tricky. I would imagine Jazz will say, if they have a plant-based mechanism, which I'm assuming they do because of this patent, but may not be true, I don't know. If they do have a plant system, then they're going to say that the product of the plant system is special and that, you can't just copy it.
Yeah.
And that'll, that's what sort of Premarin did. I certainly think the generic is more complicated than it's possible at least that it's more complicated than.
It seems counterintuitive that a generic from a natural product would be harder to genericize.
Yeah, you can make, you would need the same plant and grow it in the same conditions.
For it to be labeled.
Yeah, and then you have to prove that it had the same API. And the problem is these minor active ingredients, if there are any. This patent sort of suggests that this is pure and that there are only trace amounts of THCA and CBDA, and this is all CBD, but it seems like there's a mixture of cannabinoids that they would argue, if I were them, it contributes to the efficacy, and therefore, unless you replicate the entire mass spec, which would be very hard to do.
Is it even mass spec? They just say gas-chromatography. They could just be doing FID.
Whatever it is, they would want to show that you'd have to replicate all of the constituents of the product by any analytic method. And if there are any minor contributing constituents, that's part of the product. That's not an impurity. And interestingly, they have these specs. The first one that's interesting is not more than 0.1% THC. These are potential organic impurities. But there's other impurities, and presumably a lot of this is redacted, funny enough, by FDA. They actually looked like they wanted to revise the THC limit, and they redacted how much they wanted to revise it to.
Probably like notches down like 0.01%.
Yeah.
It's just arbitrary, like the actual testing, the percentage, 0.3, 0.07, 0.1.
It is so arbitrary.
It is arbitrary. They assume that all the drugs are going to have the same response, and they don't.
It's really interesting. They did have the botanical review team from FDA, so that's got to be manufactured from there. That source, let's see here. Yellow crystalline, so forth, produced from cannabis sativa. So there you go. It's definitely plant-based or plant derived. Okay, so that definitely makes it more complicated. It's whenever you don't have something that's purely synthetic, you're sort of creating this very difficult product to say that you made an exact copy of. Consistent production.
So they do extract it, right? They don't synthesize it?
That's right. Yeah, this is completely plant-based, it looks like.
Do you think someone who could synthesize it would be
Well, so it's really
be
funny you
much more
say that,
valuable?
because this is what happened with generic Premarin a long time ago. Premarin is this weird mixture derived from horse urine, interestingly. Pregnant horse urine is a great way to get synthetic estrogens. And it's an estrogen sort of complex. And Premarin was given for years to women like water, thanks to Pfizer's marketing, or it was American Home Products at the time, prior to Pfizer, their acquisition by Pfizer. And so basically they gave so much estrogen to cause breast cancer. So Premarin's now not recommended as much anymore. Well, it's taken from horse being extracted and, carefully, carefully made into a pill, but it's still estrogen. And generics tried to copy it, and AHP or Wyeth or Pfizer now, the successor, basically said you can't copy this stuff because how do you know that you're getting the right combination? How do you know that you're, identically? I mean, if a generic is supposed to be an identical copy, then you got to go get some horses. And there have been cases of the opposite, though, and I'm trying to rack my brain for a few.
If you were the drug company producing the raw material, would you want to then just license the plants to other potential?
No, I think you wouldn't want to give it to anybody and be the sole source.
Give it a
Yeah, I'd say this is my trade secret.
Why horse pee out of any other animal?
But I mean, that's what
Contains
Monsanto does. They just have Terminator crops or whatever.
Yeah, no, that's in pharma. You gain a lot of economic advantage by being the only player. Once a drug goes generic, you kind of all the elasticity disappears. Yeah, you have all these different conformance of principles to article of botanic origin. Like the FDA does not see plant-based drugs every day. It's been a little bit unusual. There's semi-synthetics, but this is like purely natural product, basically. Highly purified. Best described as a highly purified drug substance from a plant source. The drug substance is neither a botanical drug substance nor considered blank. They redacted it. I'm guessing they were saying neither a botanical drug substance nor considered synthetic. And the amount redacted is like the perfect space for synthetic, the word. Very funny. Yeah, most companies will ask for redactions on their drug manufacturing process and call it trade secrets. And the FDA is pretty lenient about handing that over. So here we go, cannabidiol, 21-carbon terpenophenolic compound. It's a terpene, right? Ecotoxicological concern due to the lipophilicity. So we were talking about log P earlier. Cannabis is used throughout the US and is used illicitly in widespread locales.
What? But that's a federal crime.
Impossible.
So if I had, let's say, 10 tons of biomass that's 20 to 25% CBD and had it extracted, I wouldn't be able to sell it as a generic. I wouldn't, because of the formulation, because of that.
Oh, you'd have to go through such a generic approval process. You'd have to go through.
Gotcha.
And you'd have to formulate it and do a bioequivalent study and things like that.
And how much would a bioequivalent study, that would be $200,000, or how much would that cost you?
Usually $1 million or $2 million. The manufacturing would be another couple million. So you could conceivably make a fortune making a generic Epidiolex. The problem with that is that you'd have to overturn all those patents in court. And if you did that, you'd also be helping your other,
competitors. Yeah, exactly.
But assuming you had the supply and everything ready to go, you could do well.
Do you know if there already is a suit against them for this specific patent?
There will be. Once that's a whole interesting process too. We're just talking about the basics of the generic industry. Give me 1 second though. Yeah, so I like generics. I mean, it's a nice business, but it's you have to be really kind of careful because you can make a $5 or $10 million investment in your generic and then lose it all or whatever. It's a very risky business from that perspective. And if you have 20 or 30 or 40 generics, it's okay. And they kind of average out as well. Sometimes you get a big hit. Sometimes you get, a zero because your drug didn't copy exactly. Or,
for whatever reason.
Yeah, the FDA doesn't approve it or whatever. A lot of redactions and all the interesting stuff. Huh. This is really good.
Is not a botanical drug.
Right.
You can synthesize it from yams.
Estrogen, yeah.
They should have redacted that.
But it's really interesting. The term botanicals means products that include plant materials, like plant fiber, algae, or macroscopic fungi or combinations thereof. Does not include highly purified substances, like paclitaxel, for example, is highly purified from the yew tree, and that was one of the first chemos. And Bristol-Myers chopped down a lot of yew trees to make paclitaxel. It's very hard to make synthetically, almost impossible. And if you look at, quite frankly, the elephant in the room, opioids, those are made semi-synthetically. So ultimately, I sort of agree with this, that it's not a botanical drug, which makes it then very easy, quite frankly, to just make the synthetic and say, it's one API, right? It's not. Otherwise, it wouldn't be cannabidiol. It would be like cannabis derived or cannabidiol extract. It's cannabidiol, 100 milligrams. That's it. The price of this thing is so high that I don't even think the synthetic versus natural is going to make a difference from a product cost perspective. I think that's really. It does say it controls growing, harvesting, and primary processing of it, and there is growing protocol and glass houses and all this stuff, but ultimately you don't need any of that if you can just make a synthetic, which that's a very easy synthesis.
Where's the company? Where is this? Is this GW?
GW got acquired by Jazz.
They're in Ireland.
One and the same.
I wonder if they're
GW,
growing this product in Ireland or if it's.
I don't know where they grow it, but I think it might be in the UK where GW is based. They have the redacted growing protocol in here. I'm sure they're not giving that out. There you go. Originally, Carl Linnaeus of Linnaeus, that was like the first taxonomy guy, described sativa in 1737.
Gee.
Lamarck was just another Lamarckian evolution, right? He classified it separately. That's so funny. So it's been around a long time. It's hard to claim that you patented. Any of these patents should be
That's what
really.
I'm saying is that it's like, how are they going to get away with that?
Yeah, I mean, you can make new inventions of old things. I mean, you discover that cannabis would be a great rocket fuel, you would get a patent for that. It's not expected by those skilled in the art.
Who has the patent for the cannabis-based lube then? I wonder if that's a privately held one.
Well, remember, they do
When's
expire after 17 years. The first written record of Chinese Emperor Shen Nung in 2727 BC. Herodotus also mentioned cannabis use. Previous studies have utilized a wide range of oral doses of CBD and THC for epilepsy and treatment-resistant schizophrenia. But if you look at this, there we go. Hypnotic and anti-epileptic effects of cannabidiol. J. Clin Pharma called 1981. So that kind of kills any patent. Chronic administration of cannabidiol to epileptic patients. Pharmacology, 1980. Holy moly. And
So this is what the lawyers would pull up to try to invalidate.
I'd be
patents?
shoving that in front of the judge saying, Your Honor, people have known this would work. These people aren't geniuses. And then, of course, the company will say, well, the patent office gave us a patent. And, judges who do these cases know that doesn't mean much. Sometimes they'll be convincing depending on the judge you get and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, that is prior art. Again, the problem is the quality of prior art. You could say, well, so people thought it was true, but where was the double-blind placebo-controlled study? So remember, in patents, you can copy something without infringing. So you could say, that's great that they have this extract, but we don't need to use this patent because we don't make an extract. So you could just design around that patent, and the rest of these 9 patents are toast or 8 patents are toast because of the prior art. So we got 9 of the patents are dead in my analysis. Patent 10 is another use patent.
The other thing that I was interested about is that this cannabinoid, this specific drug, works better, they say, with THC or with other cannabinoids in sync, like an entourage effect,
Well,
where they work better. The efficacy will
they didn't
be,
do this. That wasn't the study, and of course with the FDA, you can't. Yeah, they would have a hard time doing that kind of trial. But they got
even adding just like 0.1% THC to that substance that
probably would have created some regulatory complexity. A lot of these are just additional claims to the same patent, so most of these are the same patent family, as they say. All use patents. Again, to some extent, it was surprising that the use was there. On the other hand, it wasn't. All right, another use patent. I mean, they don't stop with these use patents. And they'll say the patent examiner reviewed every piece of evidence and they concluded that the patent should be given. Why would they do that? If it wasn't a valid patent? Well, they could be wrong. There's a lot of different epilepsies, so it looks like they claimed each one. TSC, Dravet, Lennox-Gastaut, and then they probably claimed, epilepsy in general, treatment-resistant epilepsy, epilepsy when you use it in this amount. You can sort of keep that slicing and dicing, and every time you get a new claim issued by the examiner, you get a new patent if they don't issue them at the same batch. So I got 5 or 6 patents out of my same one patent family filing. So it seems like we're getting to the formulation patent in a second here, but formulation patents are seldom enforceable. There's nothing new about most drug formulations. Here's preparations. So, all right, a CBD preparation comprising greater than or equal to 95% CBD, and the other cannabinoids have this much ratio. Well, that's a good patent, but if the FDA doesn't require you to have the same amount, then you might be okay. Focal seizures, another subset of epilepsy. All right, so I think somebody will make a generic to this thing. When exactly? Don't know, but let's see, the orphan drug expires 7 years from approval, so that's 2025. Yeah, let's see. I'll look like this.
I wonder when the DEA will finally just admit that cannabis-derived things or it's like, how can they claim it's Schedule 1? How can they still, with a straight face, that marijuana is a Schedule 1 narcotic?
It's not just the DEA, it's the FDA too.
Yeah, as well.
The FDA is no fan of this stuff. And they regulate food, drugs, and alcohol. Well, without the pipeline, I get Jazz worth $150 a share, which is almost exactly what it's trading at. It's so frustrating. You spend hours and hours and hours working on these stocks, and then you see that the market is basically exactly right with what you're thinking. Annoying, huh?
Some algorithms doing that.
Yeah. That's basically the key to financial analysis. Is if most of the stocks you're looking at are fairly valued, you're kind of doing it right because the market's pretty efficient. You're hoping to find a diamond in the rough every now and then, whether it's your enhanced perception or it's variant perception that you see something the market doesn't, or that just hard work and you find the one diamond in the rough. This forecast could be wrong if one of Jazz's pipeline drugs works out really well. I didn't personally think any of them looked very good, so I didn't include them in my model. But if this orexin 2 agonist all of a sudden becomes a $2 billion product, this would be a really good investment. Conversely, if Xywav goes generic before 2033, this would be a good short. For example, if I just press delete here, you can see the NPV of the company drops from 150 to just 99, which is far less than the current price of 150. But it wouldn't drop to 0, interestingly. Also, if Epidiolex stays FDA approved and grows forever, instead of 150, the company would be worth 230, which would make it a pretty good investment. That might happen. I don't know for sure that Epidiolex will go generic through a synthetic route. Could very easily, not. So it depends on what happens here. But on balance, it looks like it's fairly valued.